everybody. Laura Slinn here, and I'm here with my partner, one of my partners at Avalon Empowerment, Kelley Oswin.
Hey, everyone.
And we are coming at you today with To Be or Not to Be Vulnerability Edition. So as coaches, vulnerability is obviously a really big topic in our world. And, and it's something that can be really, really powerful, and also something that can be kind of dangerous too. So Kelley and I have a lot of conversations about this ourselves. Probably Kelley from from 2012 when we first ran trainings together.
Yeah, totally. That's, I think, when we started having the conversations, because we were out there, we were doing trainings and we were starting to share our stories and what our experiences had been. And and I think our lens on all of that was really different at the time.
Yeah, because I came from this perspective of of course we'll share. Why wouldn't we share everything? Why wouldn't we be real and authentic?
Right. And I was sharing with you, in terms of my background and in the therapy world, there's really super, I don't want to say stringent, but there's definitely messages around boundaries, around how much gets disclosed from a therapist point of view with a client or with, or a group of clients, right? And specific reasons why that is, right?
Yeah. And, I think I remember our early conversations too. And I also remember when I first started coaching, just for some background, everybody, when I started coaching, I did fertility coaching, because if you haven't heard my story, I have this really beautiful miracle baby story that brought me into the world of coaching in the first place and brought me to meet extraordinary people like Ernie Pavan and Kelley Oswin. But behind the miracle story was a story of healing trauma. And when I first started doing talks at a fertility clinic to promote my business, in the beginning, I didn't share any of my personal story. Not because I had strong professional boundaries. It was straight up because I was scared, worried about what people would think. But I didn't share. I didn't share at that level in the beginning. And what I found was that people would come up afterwards and be like, "Wow, that was really amazing information. Thank you so much. This was enlightening. This was illuminating. Loved the talk." But I got zero clients. When I started to share my own journey and what I had been through, all of a sudden people were coming up afterwards saying, "Oh my God, thank you so much. I have so much hope. That was amazing. I would love to hear more. Can we talk? Do you think it's possible for me?" And all of a sudden clients started to flow. I got goosebumps even going back to that time. And it was things changed instantly. And that's when I really embraced the idea of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's definitely sort of two sides of the coin. But I don't think we can really talk about vulnerability without acknowledging, and if for people who know me that are watching this that already know, it is true for me, I think it's true for you, and it's true for a lot of people in the coaching industry who are aware of the work of Brené Brown. And Brené Brown, I don't even think you can talk about vulnerability without referencing Brené Brown.
Okay, so and that I'm going to pull up a couple of Brené quotes.
Yeah, absolutely.
People are probably familiar with.
Yeah. And for those that aren't, there's an amazing body of work that Brené has done around vulnerability, the power of vulnerability, and research around vulnerability, courage, and shame, and in those areas of work. But amazing quotes. You want to share these, Laura?
Yeah. So again, in case you are not familiar with Brené, and I think this is why Kelley resonates with Brené so strongly, is because she's a researcher, and her background is in social work as well. And for her, it was coming to grips with vulnerability being so powerful was something that really shook the foundation of her way of doing work. So sort of what Kelley had experienced. And she got really big with her TED Talk on vulnerability. So if you haven't seen that, you definitely need to see it. So Brené says a few things. Brené says, vulnerability is our most accurate measurement of courage. It's the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And it's not about winning and it's not about losing. It's about having the courage to show up and be seen. And I think these are the sentiments that in the coaching world, a lot of coaches sort of harness and just go full tilt into sharing their stories.
Well, think about those words, right? To have courage, to have creativity, innovation, to create change. who doesn't want to be identified with those attributes, right? To step into creativity, innovation, like those are all really good things. And to hear that vulnerability is the birthplace of those things and the connection gets made. Oh, in order to do that, I need to step more into vulnerability.
Yeah. I know that some of the things that you talk about in our training and in our community, Cal, is like there's a sweet spot when it comes to vulnerability, and there's a level of appropriate self-disclosure. And sometimes that part gets missed because Brene didn't just say this about vulnerability, she said these things too. Well, there we go.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. So she said vulnerability is based on mutuality. Why can't I say that word? And requires boundaries and trust. It's not oversharing. It's not purging. It's not indiscriminate disclosure. And it's not celebrity style social media information dumps. Vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them. And this is what really sits with me, and it's really interesting because as Laura knows, I posted this on social media, and as information and a learning opportunity, right? And I think that's one of the things that I want to share here is that even this whole discussion that Laura and I are having is not so much about right and wrong around vulnerability and how we do this as coaches, but more so about digging into and looking at how we do anything we do from all different sorts of lenses, and to ask ourselves, what are the impacts of what we do, right? Because I know that one of our core values is around doing no harm. So these types of conversations are really important to do some of that self-reflective piece. So when I posted this, and really to give people sort of that opportunity to look at vulnerability from a different lens, what I found happened is that with many coaches who it pushed buttons. There were buttons that were pushed that were like, wait a second, what does this mean? And I think for some coaches, they may have gone into a space of, have I done something wrong? Perhaps even feeling, and I'm making some assumptions around it, around feeling shame, right? Saying, oh, wait a second, like if it's not that, and I've done that, if I have purged, or if I'm reading this and now reflecting, going, oh, maybe I did overshare. Are they now in a place where, feeling shame or feeling they've done something wrong? And I think that that's where button pushing really comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I posted this and those buttons, I started to get some of that feedback. I thought, okay, we need to open up a conversation about vulnerability, what it really is. And, let's talk about maybe even like some of the challenges that come up from it, but there's lots of good things that can come up from it too. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the other things that I heard back too was people saying like, why are you telling us to hide? Like we shouldn't be hiding,
Right.
we should be sharing, and that kind of thing. So there's one other video clip I'm going to see if I can pull up, because I know, Kelley, you share this in our impact and influence training when it comes to the appropriate self-disclosure model, or in your coaching supervision.
Yeah, it's in our advanced training in the coaching supervision where we're starting, this is where we open up these conversations.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is just a little clip that Kelley shares there too. It's Brene and Oprah saying basically the same thing, but it's worth repeating.
So vulnerability is letting it all hang. That's a myth, right? That's a myth. That's a myth. Live tweeting your bikini wax is not vulnerability. Sharing intimate details about your personal life on Facebook, not vulnerability. Vulnerability is about trust and intimacy and connection. We share with people who've earned the right to hear the story. Ooh, that's good. Tweet that right now. That is so good. We share with people who've earned the right to hear the story. Yes. In my job, everybody doesn't do vulnerability.
That is such a key piece of information about sharing with people who have earned the right to hear your story. I think is a key piece. The other piece that always stands out for me is also sharing with people who have the space to hold what you're sharing as well, right? I remember years ago going to a speaking event, a local speaking event, And there was a woman on stage who shared in great detail her trauma story. And I walked out of there not knowing that that's what I was walking into, and walked out feeling like super super unwell. And we'll talk about vicarious trauma and what that is, but that's I walked out really kind of feeling that way, like I had just been through a traumatic event myself.
Mhm.
Because I wasn't in a space where I knew what I was walking into. I didn't know that that's what was going to be heading my way. I didn't have the container for it, and really I hadn't earned the right with her to hear her story.
Mhm.
Right? Yeah.
I think too, there's almost like a little bit of peer pressure in the coaching space that if you're not being super vulnerable, there's something wrong with you.
Right.
And that's where like that piece around like people have to earn the right to hear the story is, I think, really, really sunk in for me, at least with with some of the stories that I could and do share. So I think that there's like multiple sort of aspects to this. Number one is asking ourselves why, for what purpose would we share? Number two is saying what specifically do we share and what don't we share? And number three is when do you share it? Like, do you share it in
Right.
real time? Do you share it after? So why don't we start with the why first? Why, what is, I know you talk about this, Kelley, like for what purpose?
Yeah. And we teach how to do metaphor and how to do storytelling. And, there can be, when we start to ask ourselves, like, for what purpose am I disclosing something about myself? And this can happen on social media. This can happen in one-on-one work, coaching work. This can happen in live presentations, right? So it's really about, asking yourself, number one, for what purpose am I sharing this? Is this a learning opportunity for my client? Like, is there because we know that storytelling connects to the limbic part of the brain, the emotional centers of the brain. We know that storytelling creates that level of connection for people and helps in the learning process, right? So when we ask ourselves why, and we really consider what we're sharing and why we're sharing it, when we're, I know in our line of work, like in our code of ethics, we're always talking about putting our clients' needs first, right? What is in our client's best interest? If we assess that it's in our client's best interest because it's a learning opportunity for them to create that level of connection, that may be an appropriate time to share a story, right?
Mhm.
Kind of like your fertility story, right? When did people actually connect to the story? When you started to share more of that information.
Yeah. And and I think it's really important. I remember one of the things that in the early days in coaching that took away a lot of my neuroses of, am I going to do it right? What if I mess up? Blah, 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 was just to know that I had studied, certified, trained at the highest levels that I could, and that I was competent with the tools, and then to get my personality out of the way and make it all about the person who's in front of me. So I have like a little, it's an Eckhart Tolle quote that still sits in my office by where I would meet with clients. And it says your role is not to be there as some sort of role or function, but to be a field of conscious presence to let the work flow through. And we can't be a field of conscious presence when we're centering on ourselves.
Right.
I'm sharing and my purpose is because it's about me and what I'm going through and my need to unload that. I should not be doing that with my clients, potential clients, or an audience. That's work I need to be doing with Kelley Oswin or my coach or my supervisor.
Right. Well, it completely shifts the relationship, right? Like in what we run the risk of, and I think you're like, I want to mention a couple things because you talked about certification and learning these pieces. Because I think what we do know about the coaching industry is that it's highly unregulated. And so there's definite challenges that come up with that. And one of them being just even understanding why centering yourself in the work with your clients is a super unhealthy piece to do, but also that it doesn't serve your client and their needs, right? What it does is actually it shifts the relationship, and it shifts how that relationship initially is set up in terms of coach and client, and it morphs into something more like a friendship, where however, the difference being one of those friends is invested in coaching.
Yeah. Because I joke that I wouldn't have any friends if it weren't for our community. Like a lot of my closest relationships are inside of our community and with our clients. And at the same time, I think that's really important. I remember going to an event once and the person facilitating the event came in, they clearly were having a bad day. And really started talking about the doubts and the worries about being good enough that they were having as they showed up that day. And I remember not raising my hand and asking questions because I was like, is it going to be too hard of a question? Like, I already know that they're in that space. I'm not going to get I don't get my needs met because now I'm worried about my coach. And as a coach, you never want your clients to be worried about you. Like, you can be real, you can show up, you can be authentic, but the moment that shifts,
Yes.
you can't show up for them, you can't hold space anymore.
Well, and as soon as your client goes into the caretaking space for you, there's the risk of running a codependent relationship. Right. And now we're in the realm of codependency, and it's I need to withhold my needs and my needs being met because I'm aware that my coach is going through something. I'm aware that my coach is struggling. And so it does have an impact on that coach client dynamic. Right. And that's why in the therapy world, it's like it's a hard stop. Right. And it's Marianne Williamson. I know we attended something that she was presenting, and she said a couple things that were really important that stood out to me. And she said, when I'm coaching, Marianne's stuff goes over here, right? It doesn't come into this space, right? The other thing she said is, if we hold up, and I'll paraphrase because she didn't say exactly all of this, but we hold power. There's an innate power imbalance in relationship when you're coaching. And one of the things that Marianne specifically said is that we hold the psyche of our clients in our hands. And so we have to be really mindful and honor that with great power comes great responsibility. And so all of these pieces play into that.
Yeah. I know that was such like a powerful mic drop moment on that training. Everybody was commenting in the chat, like, we hold the psyche of our clients in our hands. And this is something that needs to be at the forefront, above and beyond anything else that's going on personally, above and beyond any feedback that we get from sharing. Because listen, like, we'll overshare sometimes. It's not about doing it perfectly.
Exactly.
And it's not about coming across like you don't have problems. I'm pretty sure that all of our clients know that, like, I have.
We're still human. Yes.
I'm a mom, like, sort of homeschooling in the middle of lockdown too, right? Like, people know that there is stuff going on. And that's totally okay. So it's not about hiding. It's not about trying to be perfect. It's really a conversation about having professional boundaries.
Yes.
Knowing what those boundaries are and having discernment and being discerning, because like you said, Kelley, in the therapy world, like, it's a hard line, like, it's very clear. In coaching, it's more of a fine line.
Yes.
And we're constantly doing this like dance and finding this balance. So let's talk about what to share. Like, how do you know what to share and what not to share?
Right. I think, well, number one, we talk about our coaches understanding who their dream clients are and who it is that all of their messaging is directed to. And I think number one is really thinking about, what does that dream client need to hear from you? What would be important for you to share? I think that I am a believer, and people can debate with me about this, and that's okay. But I'm a believer that when we're in something, that's not the best time to be sharing, because we haven't given ourselves the time to heal, to be able to hold, like, to be able to present it to our clients, the people who are looking to us to guide them. We need that opportunity, and I think we owe it to ourselves to give ourselves that gift of healing in space. And I'm not talking about perfection, right? I am talking about doing the inner work, and being on the other side of it, reflecting back.
One of the guidelines that I found really helpful for me was that I would share the scars, but not the gaping, seeping, festering wounds.
Right. Right.
If there was gaping, seeping, festering wounds, that was where I could do my work. And that's, and again, it's a fine line. I think a lot of people in our community know that I'm going through a bit of a grieving process right now.
Right.
And that's okay, but it's not, but they also know that I'm like compartmentalizing and showing up for things like this and doing my work around that. And I'm okay
Right.
with sharing that. But I think what's really important about that, Kelley, I just want to go back to the codependency piece, because when we're sharing, when we're in the wound,
Yes.
we
Yes.
run the risk of creating a codependent dynamic with clients. And can you be really clear with what that means and how that looks? And how do we know if that's what we've unintentionally done?
Oh, absolutely. It'll show up as your client now caretaking for you. Right? Now all of their needs, codependency really shows up as your client will put their needs aside to ensure that you're taken care of. So they'll now perhaps, like, it can show up in a variety of ways. One of the ways it can show up is, I'm not going to share everything that's going on with me today because I know you're going through something, and I'm going to withhold because I feel it might be too much for you. Right? That's codependent. It can show up as, just not wanting to reach out, just not wanting to, be a burden to your coach because they're going through specific issues in their own life, right? So it can show up with like people pleasing, right? It can show up with trying to speed through the coaching process because it'll be in the best interest of the coach to move through things faster so that they can deal with what they need to deal with. So it's really, codependency really shows up in that caretaking way where I'm going to put my own needs aside so that I can take care of my coach.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to be like really clear, and I think in the world of social media where a lot of us live our lives very publicly, like I
Yes.
could post something, I don't have pets, so I'll use the example that I lost a pet. And people could
Yeah.
reach out with love and support and empathy and be like, hey, I know you're going through something. I know basically like every American friend that we have, I was reaching out to on January 6th saying like, oh my God, are you okay? Including some of our
Right.
coaches. And that I don't see that as being like a codependent dynamic. Like I really think we need to look at this in the context of the work. So for me, I always knew if I went too far was if I shared my story and at the end of it, people would come up and talk to me, or people comment in your comments. And if at the end of that share, people are saying, oh my God, you poor thing. Oh my God, I can't believe you went through that. Like, oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
I can't believe that happened to you. Or like checking in right after sharing, like, are you okay? And I knew that that's when I'd like pushed the envelope too far, because other times I could share the exact same story with a few less details. And the way I sort of share it now, and what I get instead is like, by and large, like, oh, thank you so much. Like, I have hope. Like, thank you so much for being willing to share that. That must have been difficult, but I made so many connections and I have new ahas.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about too is the difference between empathy and sympathy, right? Like, I think we run into the realm of sympathy. And it happens when here's the other thing, right? And I think that this is one of the things, especially around trauma, right? There's a big movement. Many of you know that we have the training in terms of trauma sensitive coaching that, there's a huge surgence of trauma, like a body of work around trauma and trauma work. And I think that so many people now are moving into this space of talking about their trauma, which is super important, because we know that shame and trauma are closely linked, and that shame can only exist, is another Brene piece, right, with secrecy and judgment. And there's those pieces. The thing with trauma is that, and I think there's been some challenge around it, because people use the label trigger warning when that's not appropriate. Like, there's a difference between trigger warnings and button pushing, right? And so there's been this disconnect. But I think when it comes to trauma, one of the big pieces to remember is the impact of vicarious trauma. And that's what I think is it's not about sharing that you've had trauma. It's the risk that we run when we go into intimate details about trauma and our trauma experiences. what we know through, our tools and the work that we do with the unconscious mind is that the unconscious mind cannot decipher, does not differentiate between what is real or what is imagined, right? And when most people are trying to connect with someone through storytelling and someone's sharing their story, we tend to run the movie in our heads of the story. And more often than not, that is also in our mind's eye. We're doing that looking through our own eyes in that movie.
You're sharing your story and I'm in the audience. What you're saying is, I'm then, in order to empathize and understand what you went through, I run the story through my own perceptions, and we're doing that in an associated way. And that's how vicarious.
At 100%. 100%. And empaths are at high risk of this, very high risk of this. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. So here's what happens is those details now, your unconscious mind can't believes, because you filtered it, you're running the movie, you're associated into it, believes that it's happening to you. And this is where we run the risk of vicarious trauma.
This is fascinating. Every coach needs to know this. This is why we're so passionate about our work, everybody. This is what, when we talk about high integrity coaching, it's about having these conversations and being equipped with this knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. Now, there's a flip side to that coin, right? It's not all doom and gloom, right? The flip side of that coin is in sharing your story, in what we would call maybe a high chunk way or a global way without those nitty gritty details, because I'll tell you, it can be just as powerful without the nitty gritty details. And what you then have is the flip side of the coin, where you can create a vicarious healing experience, right? When it's done right. So there are, there are flip sides to the coin. There is great things that happen with vulnerability. And we're not, I want to be really clear, this discussion is not about discouraging vulnerability. It's about being really clear within yourself and integral within yourself in your role as coach, right? So and I think this is the other distinction, because you're going to see a lot of people doing vulnerable things. But when you are, you're in the public eye as a coach, and that's your role, and people look to you for that guidance, you have to be aware of how potentially it shifts the relationship and levels of codependency that can potentially transpire from that, right?
Yeah. So when we talk about coach, we're also talking about trainers, workshop facilitators, public speakers, anybody who's in that sort of position of influence with others. And I think it's one of my favorite terms of all is vicarious healing, because I think with that appropriate self-disclosure and with some discernment and a bit of trial and error too. If there's trial and error in terms of I'm going to share and work through that and see how it lands. And certainly, we do coaching with our clients around that, but even for ourselves, we've had to figure out what that looked like for ourselves. And then I think vicarious healing is the ultimate goal of vulnerability.
Yes.
So just to recap, we do that by determining why, for what purpose are we sharing?
Mm-hmm.
What specifically should we be sharing? And when is it most appropriate to share that?
Yes.
I love it.
Absolutely. So food for thought.
Some food for thought.
Yeah.
Cool. This was really fun. I think we should do this more often.
I think so too.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Would love to know if you have any questions. If you want to unpack this, let us know. We are all about having these conversations. We think they're really important.
Absolutely. See you soon.
Okay.